Well, good morning. Welcome to the Midwest Dream Car Collection. I thank you for coming out this morning. I hope you got to be here early enough to enjoy some of the great cars out in the parking lot this morning as part of our monthly Cars and Coffee, first Saturday of every month from 9 to 11. And following that every month, we have our featured car talk, which is what you're all here for. So it's always the first Saturday of every month. My name is Doug Malone. I'm Director of Vehicle Operations here, which means that I get to help pick out some of the cars that come into the museum here, including this beautiful car that we're going to hear about today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Fred Gilmore. I don't know, his son Josh came up with him today. Is Josh here somewhere? Back over here. So if you were here a year or so ago, you may have remembered a plum crazy purple Challenger that was on the floor. That was also Fred's. And he has this one and another one and a 70 Cuda. So he's a Mopar guy. But this car is just completely amazing. And Fred was telling us about this car, and I said, oh gosh, Fred, we need to have that on loan here for a while. He was more than gracious to let us borrow it for the past year or so. And unfortunately, it's going to be going home with him into this month. But next fall, he's going to bring one of his other ones. So we'll have another one on our floor next fall from Fred. So Fred keeps us in Mopar land, so we appreciate that. So anyway, let's give Fred a warm welcome, and we'll turn it over to Fred. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for coming out today. I got to tell you, I am not a professional speaker by a long shot. I'm just a farm boy from central Kansas, and so you're going to have to put up with me, and I'll do the best I can do and answer your questions. And I'll just start off with a little history of this car. It's one of 287 RTs built with the Hemi engine in 1970. There was 137 four-speeds and 150 automatics, and this car is one of the automatics. I'm the 11th owner of this car, and it still only shows about 40,000 miles on the clock. So it's been kept low. This is a record that the guy that I bought the car from did. He did a title search on it, and every time the car was bought and sold, this is the record and how many miles it had on it each time. So it's pretty good history of the car. I bought the car in April of 2001 from Tom Murray in Great Bend. Whoop, I get too many things in my hand here. You see Tom's name right down here at the bottom. And this is a certificate of title when the car was new, and this is the first owner of the car. And this guy is still alive, and I've talked to him several times about some things on the car, and it's pretty interesting. And when he bought the car, he was racing it, and he didn't have it very long, blew the engine up. And Dodge replaced the engine once, and then they wouldn't do it again. So when I got the car, it didn't have the numbers matching engine. I bought the car in 2001, and it was in pretty good condition when I bought it. So I used it a couple of years, showed it for a couple of years, and in the fall of 2002, I decided to do a full restoration on it. And I found a numbers correct date code block, a new old stock block, from a guy in Georgia that had it. And this is the bottom view of the block, and it had all the paint markings still on it. It was cast, I believe, in 1969 or 1970, I forget exactly, but those are the pistons and stuff in it. This is the best you could do without having the numbers matching engine. And I found a set of new old stock heads and built this thing up. And then a few years later, my friend Daniel in Florida called me one Sunday morning, and he said, it's about 6 o'clock. He said, hey, you got to see this thing that's on eBay. And I said, well, Daniel, it's 6 o'clock here. He said, I don't care what time it is. You got to see this. So I got up, went downstairs, flipped the computer on. He gave me this eBay auction number, and it's the numbers matching engine for my car. 35, 40 years later, whatever it was. This guy in Lubbock had this motor, and he told me, I called him and talked to him about it, and he told me a few things about it, like It had been, something had been shoved through the side of the block and it had been repaired, so I was pretty sure that he hadn't stamped a number on it just to see if it was out there. So I let the auction run and he had it priced where I didn't think it would sell, and it didn't. So I called him back and we cut a deal on it, and I went down and got it. And he told me it was all ready to go. And I really didn't trust him, so I took it to my engine builder in Wichita. Some of you may remember Dwayne Somm. He was a good guy. He died a few years ago of a stroke. But I took it down to Dwayne, and he tore it down and went all through it. And I went down to get it and loaded it all in the trailer, and he come handing me this box, pretty heavy little box. And I said, Dwayne, what's in the box? And he said, well, those are your push rods. And I said, well, guys, don't you think I need them in the motor? And he said, I know you well enough to know that you're not going to take that motor home and put it in that car. He said, and I didn't want it sitting there with some of the valve springs compressed, so I left the push rods out. He said, when you get ready to put it in there, you call me and I'll come up and we'll finish the job and start it up and run it. Well, in the meantime, Dwayne died. I didn't get it put in till about, 2018 maybe. And I took it back to a guy in Wichita that had a dyno shop. And he went ahead and put the push rods in, and we started it up on the dyno. And we ran it. I think maybe I've got there's a picture of the thing when I got it back from Texas. And then here it is sitting in I'll get out here where I can see it a little bit better. This is it sitting in the shop on the dyno machine. And it's quite an experience to sit there and watch your very valuable engine sitting there running almost wide open and trying to get as much horsepower out of it as he can. And there's a picture from the control room through the glass and into the engine shop. And then this is the results of one of the pulls that we did. This one down here is the RPM, and this is how many horsepower at whatever the RPM was, and then this is the torque. So it's got, they always advertise them at 425 horse, and we all knew they had a little more than that. And this one came in at about 480. I think maybe there might even have been a little bit more than that somewhere along the line, but anyway, it's a nice strong motor. This is a picture of the VIN tag that is on the fender. Actually, it's called a fender tag. And this tells you all the options that are on this car. In the mid to late 60s, Chrysler had installed the 426 engine in some of their bigger framed cars, but they didn't really have a smaller car other than the Duster and the Valiant, the A-body cars, and they were kind of limited to how big of a motor that they could put in them. And there was kind of a voluntary moratorium on auto builders for engines of no more than 400 cubic inches to be put in their cars. Well, that moratorium ended a couple of years later, and 400 plus engines started showing up in the things like the Camaro and the Mustang and the Cutlass. They were putting some pretty big motors in some of those cars then. So in 1967, this left Chrysler with a pretty good sized gap between their A bodies and their B bodies that could only hold those 383s, but then they had the Roadrunner and the Charger, and they were already getting the big block motors, the 440s and the 426s. But they didn't have a mid-sized car or what they considered to be a pony car. So in '67, they started designing these cars, the Challenger, the Barracuda. And on Friday, August 1st, 1969, they rolled the first Challengers and Barracudas off the Hamtramck main assembly lines 1 and 2. The VIN number on this car is on the bottom line there that starts with that JS. The J is the Challenger line. If it would have been a B, it would have been a Barracuda. And then there was an S, an H, and an L. The S was special, and the H was high, or the L was low. And then the 23 means it's a two-door hardtop. If it would have been a convertible, it would have been a 27. And then you get to your engine code, that first letter. An R indicates that that's a Hemi motor. A V would have been a 446 pack, for example, or a G would have been a 318. And then there was all the other engine codes there too, but I won't bore you with that. And then the next letter is the model year, that's a 0. And the B is the assembly plant. The B is the Hamtramck plant. And these cars were also built in Los Angeles, but they didn't ever build any Hemis or convertibles in Los Angeles. So all of those were built on the Hamtramck line. The VIN number on these cars appears in several places on the car. The radiator core support in the front, it's on the windshield cowling, it's on the engine, it's on the transmission, it's on the door sticker, the fender tag, and this is the fender tag, and then of course on the dash pad on the driver's side underneath the windshield. And this is a list of the equipment that's on this car. Those are all the option codes. And this is the broadcast sheet. And if you were lucky enough, your broadcast sheet might have been in the springs of the rear seat, maybe the back, maybe the bottom of the rear seat, maybe on the back of the driver's seat. They kind of just put them wherever they could. It's rare to find one in a Los Angeles built car because they had a deal where they said, we're not putting any trash in our cars. I guess that's California people. So it's rare to find one that was built in Los Angeles that you can actually have your broadcast sheet. And it actually adds some value to your car if you have the broadcast sheet. And this is the one that we found in the back seat of this car. And some cars had 2, some had 3, some had as many as 5. It just kind of depends on what the guys were doing that day and what they felt like doing. Occasionally they would find broadcast sheets in cars that didn't even match the car it was in. And there's a website a guy has that if you have some broadcast sheets that don't match your car and you want to give them up, you can send them to this guy and he keeps a database of this stuff. And you can actually ask this guy if, there's a chance that he might have your broadcast sheet. And there have been a lot of them found that way. This car was one of the things about the broadcast sheet. Let me go back there. It tells you a lot of stuff about this car, pretty much everything that was built on this car. As these went down the line, everybody had one of these knowing what they were supposed to put in this car. Well, this car was built the last week of production in 1970. Its production date is 7/23. And we think, from what the stories that I've been told over the years, that they were starting to use up as many parts as they could from the 70 model years. So, if the broadcast sheet called for something and they didn't have it, they just put in whatever they had. So, and I asked Eddie about this when I got the car. It's got cloth inserts in the seats, which is kind of rare. And I said, Eddie, did you put those in? And he said, nope, they were in it when I got it. So on the broadcast sheet, it says they're just vinyl seats, but it does have cloth inserts. And that's just an example of some of the things that they did to use up their parts, I suppose. Another interesting thing about this car I've learned over the years is this grille. If you'll notice, it's kind of hard to tell in that picture, but it's got like a 1/2-inch grid work in that grille. And I met this guy. His name is Carl Cameron, and he's since passed on, but he was one of the chief engineers on the Challenger. And he told me that he was sitting in his chair in the office one day, and he'd had a big day, and he said, I just kicked back in my chair, and I kind of looked up at the ceiling, and I saw this grid work in this ceiling light. And he thought, man, that would make a cool grill. So and he had some drawings of his first drawings of the grill, and he passed away before I got him. He told me he was going to send me some, and I never got him. So anyway, he is the one that came up with this design on the grill, and I thought it was pretty interesting that he had picked that up from the ceiling lights. And then this is just some pictures of the restoration of the car. I'll just kind of go through these. If anybody wants to know anything about it, well, I'll stop or back up, or anything that you guys want to know about the car. If I don't know, I'll either make up something or lie to you about it. And Then you can go home and look it up and see how bad I lied to you. But this is taking the original motor out that was in the car when I got it. I think it was a 66 block. It had 68 heads. And I had bought another car along the way that I put this motor in and made a kind of a Hemi GTX out of it. And I've since sold that car, but it just, it's a habit. It just keeps on going. And this is the car on the rotisserie.
Were those headers factory?
No, those were tube headers that somebody had put on that car before I got it. Yeah. The car has been around. I mean, it's been all over the country. It's been to Arizona. It's mostly been in Kansas and Texas, but it's been around. This is on the rotisserie, flipped up on the side, getting all the crap off the bottom of it, and this is from the other side. And then this is after we get everything off of it and on the wheels, ready to go to the body shop. Didn't have the glass out of it yet, and then this was at the body shop. The trunk floor, Mopars were pretty commonly known to have bad trunk floors, and they didn't rot from the outside. They rotted from the inside. The back gasket or the back window would leak back around the back there, and then the water would get under the trunk mat, and guys didn't know that they had any water in there, obviously, because the trunk mat was covered up. And then they started rusting, and they would rust from the inside out. So we had to put a new trunk floor in this, and that's the new floor laying there. It came from a donor car in Arizona someplace, and it was in really good shape. No rust. But you had to take the tail panel out to put it in as one piece. You can buy two-piece trunk floors, but they're just not original. So I wanted to go back with everything as original as I could. And the body work on this car, body and paint, was all done over at Jeremy's body shop in Sterling. Anybody got any questions that I might be able to answer? This placard that's in the front of the car was from a magazine article that was done in 2004, I believe, at the National Show in Pennsylvania. And I had a friend in Florida, of course, my friend that turned me on to the right motor. He had a car almost identical to mine, same color. His was a shaker car, mine's a flat hood, but they were both Hemi cars, a lot of the same equipment. I had power windows, he didn't. He had a rear window defogger, I didn't. I had the wing on the back, he had no wing, but a lot of the stuff was pretty much the same color, and they were built within just a few minutes of each other. His was 440239, and mine was 440241. And we were friends. We knew that I knew the car was out there because I knew Tom had it, and so I finally got it bought from Tom, and that was the only show that we got to show the cars together. And Daniel has since passed. He had melanoma cancer and passed on. And his car went to some guy in back east, Pennsylvania or someplace, and I've never been able to keep track of it. So
It's a restoration question while we're looking at paint.
Yep.
Yours is spectacular. Is it the same composition paint as they would have put on it?
It is not. This is base coat, clear coat. And that would have been single stage that was on the car originally. Now, Daniel he was anal enough, he did paint his car single stage. But I didn't want to use a single stage, and Jeremy didn't want to paint it single stage. So we got the formulation for this. It's Sickens company is the paint company, and he got the formulation, and Daniel sent me a chunk of his original paint on his car, and we compared it, and it was really close. Yeah.
How do you repair a block?
Say that again?
How do you repair a block?
Well, now that's a good question. I don't really know. It was repaired when I got it, and whoever did it did a really nice job. And it evidently didn't go into the water jacket or the oil, because I don't think you would be able to if it had. So when I took it to Dwayne in Wichita, we blasted all the paint off of it. And he looked it over. He said, they did a pretty good job. He said, but I went ahead and touched it up a little bit. There was some things that I didn't like about it. And you can get under the car and look, and you can't see it. So they did a really nice job. And Daniel found the engine for his car also a few years before I found mine. And his had come out because there was an oil leak in the back. And it was a pretty bad casting. And he had sent it to Indy Cylinder Head, and they repaired it with bronze, all these places around soft plugs and back there where it was leaking. And they went so far as to put the little pits like you would see on cast iron back in their repair. So when it was painted, there was absolutely no way you could tell that it had been repaired. But they did a great job.
I overhauled a 440 in a motorhome one time. And the guy drove it to Phoenix for Christmas. And on the way back, he ran it out of water. And he parked it at his house here when he got back to Manhattan. The next morning, he went out to start it, and it was seized up. So we pulled the engine back out of it again. And it had gotten so hot that it broke the webs on the main bearings.
Wow.
It had cracked them.
Yeah, I pretty much did all the reassemble. I'm not a painter by any stretch. That's why I had Jeremy do all the heavy work on the paint and stuff. But I did all the paint and everything else on the engine and on the interior of the car. But I know my limitations, and I cut it off at the doors. So that's where the paint and body work was done. But as far as all the restoration on everything else other than the engine, oh, and the headliner, I did take it to a guy in Wichita and had the headliner, or in Hutch, had the headliner put in. But all the interior is still the original interior as far as the upholstery, and the dash, which is those dashes really, if they sat out in the sun a lot, they cracked. Steering wheel, I sent that off to a guy in Pennsylvania that hand paints all that wood grain and everything back on there. That's the way they were done, was they were painted on there. It looked to make it look like wood grain. And they didn't last very long, especially a car without power steering and a big motor up front. You know, I imagine that took it off pretty quick because nobody was going to stick their finger in there and go like this with that thing in there. Yeah, so I sent it off to him, and he did a great job on it. If you take a look at it and appreciate it. And there is the window sticker, and that is a reproduction. I could get, of course, all the equipment off of the broadcast sheet and the fender tag, and I knew where the car was sold new because I had talked to Eddie, and he told me where it was sold new. And that Sharpstown Dodge does not exist anymore, but I tried to run down the address for that place. I had a little trouble finding the address, but I got a hold of a dealership there in Dallas. Is that where it was? Houston. And I asked for the parts department. And this guy answered the phone, and I said, how long have you been in the parts with Chrysler? And he said, almost 50 years. And I said, well, then you're just the guy I want to talk to. I said, I'm looking for the original address of Sharpstown Dodge. And he had it, I think he had it on top of his head. But that's how I got all that information for that. And there's a company that makes these reproduction stickers. And it's pretty interesting to have that. You know, people like to look at that and see what that car costs new. And that Hemi engine option was, what was that, $778.75. That was money well spent. You know, had you only known back then, you would have bought a whole fleet of them.
It says super performance axle package. What ratio is that?
It's a 410 rear end. Yeah, and it's a Dana 60 rear end. It's like a truck rear end. Yeah, same rear end they use in trucks. And the transmission also, that A833, I believe is the number. It's the same transmission they use in trucks, other than they put different gear ratios in them. And there is the cloth inserts in that seat. And I don't know if you noticed about how these motors, they go in from the bottom. I mean, you can take them out the top, but it's so much easier to get them in and out of the bottom. I built this little cart here that holds the engine and transmission, and you just raise the car up and roll it right in under there and lower the car right down over the engine, transmission, the K-frame and everything just bolts right up to the frame. Really makes it a lot easier, a lot less headaches and fear of dropping something. It just takes a lot of time. Don't get in a hurry. Send your parts off, like brake boosters, master cylinders, that kind of stuff, to people that know how to build them and interior parts and stuff, so that you don't have to go back and have them done again. But I had a lot of fun rebuilding the thing, and I have a lot of fun showing it. That's a collapsible spare, and I obviously will never use it because the can is a fake. It doesn't have a drop of air in it. As a matter of fact, I think it's solid. So if I'm stranded out alongside the road someplace, well, stop and give me a spare. And I do drive the car. I will not drive it on my dirt road over to the highway, but I'll take it over there and unload it, and I'll drive it. I don't like to drive it on 2-lane roads, but I do some. And these are just some pictures of the engine, getting the engine built up. The valve covers are painted with this, what they call wrinkle paint. It goes on, when you paint it on there, you think, well, it doesn't look like wrinkle paint, but as it dries, then it starts to doing its wrinkle thing, and they look pretty good after they dry. I think there's the question about the headers. I think there's the carburetors. I sent those off to a guy in Virginia that is a magic man. He makes them look brand spanking new, probably better than they were when they were new. And those are the heads that I sent. I actually had a guy come over and we did those heads right at my place. And the booster, sent that to a guy in Texas. Now there's the original factory manifolds, and they do look like headers, but they're not tube, they're cast iron. And I painted them with this high heat cast iron looking paint, and they said the best way to do that is to heat it up after you paint it. So I took them in and put them in the oven in the house. And it didn't smell very good for a couple of weeks after I'd done that, but I did it anyway. And yeah, it wasn't a big hit, no. Yeah, and this is the NOS block that I found. It's got all the paint markings and everything on it. And pretty rare piece of history. I hated to paint over it, but I've got a lot of good pictures of it. So I tell you some stories about that block too, but we won't get into that right now. And I suppose you guys all recognize this guy. He was at the Dennis Gage, for those that you don't know. He had a show called, what was the name of his show? My Classic Car. Yeah, he was at McPherson, at the McPherson College show when I saw him. And then a few years later, I was back with this this B5 blue car that I'm going to have up here this fall. He was there again. I got another picture, but I didn't put it on here. Another picture of him and me standing there beside this other car 15 years later. And we both look a few years older than we did in this picture, but not so much. Viper motor, done by a guy in Canada. And that that's the old motor after it came out. I got so many pictures all mixed up here, I don't really know what's. And there's the steering wheel after it was done. And there is the GTX that got the Hemi motor that was originally in the Challenger. I bought that GTX from a guy in Detroit, Michigan. He had painted, he bought it as a parts car, and he painted it and put a vinyl top on it, and that's all he ever did to it. And all the parts of the car were stuffed inside the car when I went to get it. And I pulled in the yard with it, and my girlfriend at the time said, well, that thing will never run. And so the day that I got it done, I was first pull up there in the driveway and make sure she saw it running. And I had a lot of fun with that car. I've since sold it to a guy in Pennsylvania. And I think, as far as I know, he's still got it. I don't think he ever drives it, but he's still got it. Okay, well, that's all I've got. If you guys have any questions, well, I'd certainly be willing to try to answer them. Yes, sir.
How rare are the wings? From back in the day, I don't remember very many.
You know, that is an option that I don't believe anybody ever tracked. I think you could probably, if you wanted to give Galen Govier your credit card number, he could probably tell you. But I'm sure he wouldn't unless you gave him your card number. But he could tell you how many he had registered with the wing. I know it's pretty rare. There's not a lot of them out there. And I have seen a few at car shows, but you know, you got to get to the national shows where you see rows and rows of cars, and there'll be a few, but not very many. And this car's also got electric windows, which was a really rare option. Anybody else? I surely didn't do that good a job. Yeah.
How was the title search done? They changed the VIN numbers in the early 80s, right?
Well, but they didn't change the number after it was issued to the car. I mean, you can still, if a highway patrolman stops you driving your 70 Charger, he gets the VIN number off of the dash tag, that's still the VIN number. They didn't change them after they were issued. Now they've changed the way the format and all that stuff is, but they haven't changed the original way they were issued.
Well, see, the reason I ask is I tried to trace, I know my 56 Ford was sold in California, went from California to Arizona and then to Oregon. I've contacted the Department of Motor Vehicles in those 3 states, and they say they can't trace it because of the age. The computer will not register on VIN numbers older than 83 or 82.
Do you know that VIN number?
Pardon?
Do you know that VIN number?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Get with me after this and give it to me. And
Well, I don't have it memorized.
well, okay. Well, I'll give you my contact information. You give me that VIN number, and I'll see if I can track it down.
Okay.
Because they don't change the VIN numbers. If that car's titled in California, Oregon, or something, it's titled under that VIN number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unless it was salvaged and they issued a salvage number. That was the only way a VIN number was changed.
VIN numbers used to be the engine number.
Well, all the companies didn't start that till, Chrysler didn't start it until mid to late 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got a 53 Bel Air, and they wanted the VIN number, so I got the number off of the tag on the door, and that's not the VIN number, but I had the original title, and the VIN number matches the engine number.
So GM did the VIN number on the engines way earlier. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. Yeah. Anything else?
Did you ever deal with graveyard cars?
I haven't. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of Neil of what's Warman. What's his name?
I don't know.
Mark Warman. Yeah, he's pretty arrogant. I mean, I'll give him. He knows his stuff. He knows his Mopar stuff. I'll give him that. But he's pretty proud of himself. You know, I always thought I'd like to go out there and spend a month or 2 months, but I'm not sure Mark Warman and I'd get along. All right, that's it? Well, I'll turn it back to Doug, and he can cut you loose.
thank you. One, for restoring this car and keeping it as original as possible, because I think that's so important, and I know it doesn't come without a lot of expense, so thank you for your dedication. And thank you for coming today to talk about it all the way from Sterling, Kansas. Fred says, Doug, I'm not a speaker. I think you did an awesome job, Fred, so thank you.